The morning Lorraine Voss cleared out her office, she used an entire roll of packing tape, not because she needed it. The two framed degrees, the Crystal Award from the Institute of Corporate Finance, the small jade plant she'd kept alive for 11 years. None of it required more than a box and a steady pair of hands. But her hands weren't steady, and peeling tape gave them something to do. The sound of it, that sharp, industrial rip, echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows and came back to her like something mocking. The view from the 32nd floor of the Harwick Financial Tower had always been her favorite thing about the job. On clear days, you could see all the way across the harbor to the North Shore Mountains, their peaks white from October through May. She had stood at that window on her first morning as CEO and told herself she had finally arrived. That was 6 years ago. She didn't look at the window when she left. The lobby security guard, a young man whose name she had never once asked, held the door for her without meeting her eyes. The revolving glass caught the gray November sky and threw it back at her in pieces. Outside, the November air hit hard. Vancouver in mid-autumn had a particular kind of cold, wet, and boneless, the kind that settled into your clothes and stayed. Lorraine set the box on the concrete lip of a planter and pulled out her phone. Her car service account had been deactivated that morning along with her corporate card. She hadn't thought about that until right now. She stood on West Georgia Street with a banker's box and 11 years of professional life, trying to remember how to call a cab. The Whistler Grand wasn't where she would have chosen to land. It was a mid-tier business hotel on Burrard, the kind of place she had sent junior associates when the budget was tight. The room smelled faintly of cleaning spray and someone else's shampoo. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the carpet for a long time. The board had been clean about it, which almost made it worse. No raised voices, no accusations, just a Thursday morning meeting with outside counsel present, and a prepared statement that used phrases like restructuring of leadership and fiduciary realignment. Harwick Financial had been leveraged badly. Her call, her signature on 3 consecutive quarters of aggressive expansion, and when the correction came, it came fast. $47 million in exposure, a regulatory review, and then the vote, 8-1. She had cast the one. For the first week, she answered emails she would never send and made lists she would never act on. She called 2 headhunters who were professionally sympathetic and personally unavailable. Her lawyer told her the non-disclosure agreement was airtight and the severance was the best he could negotiate given the circumstances. She signed where he told her to sign. On the 9th day, she ran out of money that wasn't tied up in assets under review. The hotel took her credit card for a 1-week extension. When she came back from the lobby, she sat at the small desk by the window and tried to count what she actually had access to. A joint checking account with $412, a loyalty card with enough points for a domestic flight she had nowhere to go on, and a phone with 37 unread messages, most of them from people who wanted something from the version of her that no longer existed. She made coffee with the machine on the dresser and drank it standing up, looking out at the concrete wall of the parkade across the alley. Somewhere below, a delivery truck reversed and beeped. She thought about calling her sister in Calgary. She picked up the phone twice and put it down twice. On the 12th day, Lorraine Voss left the hotel and walked. She didn't have a destination. She went east on Robson, past the library, past the bus shelters with their transit ads, past the coffee shops where people sat in warm light with their laptops. At Granville, she turned south without knowing why. She walked until her feet hurt, and when she saw a diner with a hand-lettered sign in the window, "Open," she went inside because it was warm, and because she had not eaten since the granola bar she'd taken from the hotel's complimentary basket that morning. The place was called Maze. It had the particular smell of diners that have been diners for a long time, coffee and fryer oil and something sweet underneath, maybe syrup. She took a booth near the back. The laminated menu had grease in the crease of the spine. She ordered the cheapest thing on it, soup and half a sandwich, and sat with her coat still on, watching the street through the window. That was when she saw him. He came in from the cold with a girl on his hip, 5 years old, maybe 6, bundled in a coat with toggle buttons and a toque that had a small bear on the front. The man was tall, with the kind of build that came from physical work rather than a gym, and he was wearing a fleece-lined vest over a flannel shirt with a small rip at the shoulder seam. He had dark circles under his eyes that had clearly been there long enough to stop bothering him. He slid into the booth across the aisle from hers, settled the girl in beside him, and opened the menu without looking at it, the way you open a menu when you already know what you're going to order. The girl pressed her nose against the window glass. "Papa," she said, "there's a dog. I see him. He has a red collar. He does. Do you think he knows his name?" The man considered this with genuine seriousness, the way some parents do, as though no question their child asks is too small to deserve a real answer. "I think so," he said. "Dogs usually do." Lorraine looked away. She did not know why watching them bothered her, except that it didn't feel like bothering exactly. It felt like something closer to recognition, or maybe its opposite. Seeing something you'd always been adjacent to and never actually touched. She had worked 14-hour days for 6 consecutive years. She had canceled 3 vacations, 2 family Christmases, and 1 relationship that had probably been worth saving. She had told herself that was what it cost, and that the cost was worth it. The soup arrived. She ate it slowly. When the man's order came, a grilled cheese for the girl and a coffee and a bowl of chili for him, the girl immediately picked up her sandwich with both hands and took a bite that was at least 60% of it. The man laughed, a short sound, tired but real, and tucked a napkin into the collar of her coat. Lorraine was halfway through her own meal when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she answered it out of the particular desperation of someone who has stopped being selective. It was a journalist from the Financial Post who had somehow gotten her personal number and wanted a comment on the regulatory findings that had been made public that morning. Findings she hadn't known were public. She ended the call in 7 seconds and sat very still for a moment. Then she put $40 on the table, the last of the cash in her wallet, and left. Back at the hotel, she's looked up the article. It was thorough and not kind, though it was accurate, which was almost worse. The journalist had spoken to 3 former board members and 2 unnamed sources inside the company. There was a photograph of her from the company's annual report, the official one where she was smiling, with appropriate confidence in front of the Harwick logo. She looked like someone she used to know. She closed the laptop and lay down on the hotel bed in her coat. It was only then, staring at the textured ceiling of a mid-tier hotel room in a city she'd lived in for 12 years and suddenly had no footing in, that Lorraine Voss allowed herself to understand how completely she had come apart. She had fired Malcolm Reed 14 months ago. She remembered the morning clearly because she had cleared her calendar for it, which she did not normally do for terminations. Malcolm was a senior analyst in the infrastructure finance group. Meticulous, quiet, the kind of person who caught the errors other people introduced and never took credit for it. He had been with Harwick for 8 years. He had called in at 6:45 on the morning of the Pemberton acquisition meeting to say he couldn't come in. His daughter, Wren, had been admitted to BC Children's overnight with a respiratory episode, her second in 3 months, and he needed to be there. The Pemberton meeting had 8 external stakeholders, a tight, close window, and no one else who knew that file the way Malcolm did. Lorraine had told him, and she remembered the exact words, because she had used them deliberately, that she expected him at that table by 9 a.m., regardless of what was happening at the hospital, and that if he couldn't prioritize the responsibilities he was being paid to fulfill, they would need to have a different conversation. He had not come in. The conversation happened the following morning. HR was present. She had signed the termination paperwork herself. She had not thought about it again until now. Not because she'd forgotten, she hadn't, but because she had filed it under necessary and moved on, the way she had moved on from every decision that hurt someone in service of the quarter's results. The Pemberton deal closed. The numbers looked good. She went on to the next thing. Now, lying on a hotel bed with $47 million in regulatory exposure and a photograph of herself she didn't recognize, She thought about a man sitting by a hospital bed at 6 in the morning while his daughter struggled to breathe, and then getting a phone call that told him his job mattered more. She put her arm over her eyes. The asset review took 6 more weeks. Her lawyer called twice with updates, and once with a warning about a civil action that ultimately didn't materialize. She moved out of the Whistler Grand and into a furnished one-bedroom in East Vancouver that cost $1,100 a month and had a radiator that knocked at 2 in the morning. She learned to sleep through it. She applied for 11 positions. She heard back from 2. Neither led anywhere. She was in the grocery store on Commercial Drive one Tuesday afternoon in January when she turned down the cereal aisle and stopped. Malcolm Reed was standing in front of the oatmeal, reading the back of a canister with the focused expression of someone checking fiber content. Wren was beside him in a puffy coat, holding a small basket and examining its contents as though conducting an inventory. Lorraine's first instinct was to turn around. She had time. He hadn't seen her. She stood in the aisle for what felt like several minutes but was probably 4 seconds, and then she kept walking. Because the alternative felt worse, like something she would be smaller for. He looked up when she was about 6 feet away. The recognition crossed his face quickly, and she watched him actually choose in real time how to respond to it. "Ms. Voss," he said, not warmly, not coldly, just accurately. "Malcolm." She stopped. "I didn't know you were still in Vancouver." "Born here," he said. "Wasn't planning to leave." Wren looked up from her basket. She had her father's dark eyes and the particular self-possession of a child who has spent a lot of time in adult situations. "Hi," she said to Lorraine. "Hi," said Lorraine. "Papa," said Wren. "Can we get the maple kind?" "We always get the maple kind," said Malcolm. "I know, but I want to make sure we remember. We'll remember." He put the canister in his basket and looked back at Lorraine. There was something careful in his face, not hostile, just the reasonable caution of someone who had been burned and was not in a hurry to stand near fire again. She said, before she fully decided to say it, "How is she, your daughter?" Something shifted slightly in his expression. "She's better. The second winter is always easier, apparently. Her doctor says her lungs are catching up." "Good," said Lorraine. "That's good." She meant it. She was aware, in a way that felt physical, that she had no right to mean it, and that meaning it didn't fix anything. "I read about Harwick," he said, not unkindly. "Then you know most of it." "I know what the papers said." Wren was now comparing 2 different cereals she had found on the bottom shelf, wholly absorbed. Lorraine said, "I want to say something, and I want you to know I'm not saying it because I want anything from you." She paused. "What I did, the morning of the Pemberton meeting, that was wrong. I knew your daughter was in hospital. I said it anyway." She stopped. "I don't have a better explanation than that. I had decided the deal mattered more, and I was wrong about that. I was wrong about what matters." Malcolm was quiet for a moment. He looked at Wren, who had placed both cereals back on the shelf and was now examining a third. "She doesn't know," he said finally, "about what happened. She was too young. She just knows we had some hard months. You shouldn't have had those months." "No," he said. "We shouldn't have." Wren put the third cereal down and came back to stand beside her father. She slipped her hand into his without looking up, casually, the way children do when they're not seeking comfort, just proximity. Malcolm said, "What are you doing now?" Lorraine told him the truth, which she had not done with almost anyone. She said she was living in a furnished apartment on Commercial, applying for positions she probably wasn't going to get, and trying to figure out what she had been building for 11 years and whether any of it had been worth what it cost. Malcolm listened in the way he had always listened in meetings, completely, without the small performances of attention that most people substitute for the real thing. When she finished, he said, "I'm consulting now. Small clients mostly. I've been doing the work I always wanted to do." A pause. "I have a client right now who needs someone with your background. It's not Harwick level. It's a community credit union in Burnaby. They're trying to restructure after a rough 2 years, and they don't know how to think about it." He looked at her. "I could mention your name." She stared at him. "Malcolm, I'm not doing it for you," he said in a tone that was entirely without malice. I'm doing it because they need help and you're good at this. What happened between us doesn't change what you know how to do. Ren tugged his sleeve. Papa, we still need eggs. I know, Bear. 1 minute. He reached into his vest pocket and took out a business card, plain white, name and phone number, nothing else, and held it out. She took it. Call them or don't, he said. Either way. Then he put his hand on Ren's shoulder, and they went around the corner toward the dairy aisle, and Lorraine stood alone in the cereal aisle of a grocery store on Commercial Drive holding a card that weighed almost nothing. She looked at it for a long time. Bridgeview Community Credit Union was in a low building on Kingsway, with a handicap-accessible ramp and a bulletin board in the lobby that still had Christmas flyers pinned to it in late January. The branch manager, a woman named Carol Addington, shook Lorraine's hand with both of hers and said she'd heard good things, which Lorraine suspected was Malcolm being generous with what he'd actually said. The credit union had 8,000 members, 43 employees, and a capital adequacy problem that was boring and solvable if you understood the regulatory framework, which most people in that room did not. Lorraine understood it exactly. She worked 12 days straight, then went home and slept for 11 hours. Carol called her 3 weeks later and asked her to come back. The work was not glamorous. It was spreadsheets and board presentations and explaining the same concept 4 times to 4 different people until everyone understood it. She drove to Burnaby on the SkyTrain because she still didn't have a car. In March, Malcolm referred another client. In April, 2 more. By May, she had registered as a sole practitioner and moved into a proper office space in Mount Pleasant, a single room with a window that looked onto an alley and enough space for a desk, a filing cabinet, and 2 chairs. She bought a jade plant from the nursery on Main Street and put it on the sill. She called Malcolm one evening in early June. The Bridgeview engagement closed, she said. They're going to be fine. I heard, he said. Carol told me. I want to reimburse you. There was a pause. Reimburse me for what? For what I took from you. When I terminated you, your severance was calculated on 12 months. You'd been there 8 years. Under the common law analysis, you should have received closer to 18. I didn't pursue that at the time because the Employment Council said you were unlikely to. She had done the calculation 3 separate times to make sure it was right. I'd like to make up the difference. He was quiet for a moment. Lorraine, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. She realized, you don't owe me money. The statute of limitations, I know what the statute of limitations is. I'm not doing it for legal reasons. Another pause. Outside her window, a sparrow landed on the alley fence and looked around and left again. You don't have to do this, he said. I know I don't have to, she said. That's why I'm doing it. He was quiet long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then he said, Ren's birthday is next month. She wants a hamster. That seems unrelated. She's been asking since October. I keep telling her we'll talk about it. A pause. I keep saying we'll talk about it and then not talking about it because I don't want to say no. That's not unrelated either, is it? I just mean, he stopped. Some things you can make up for and some things you can't. I don't want you to confuse one for the other. I'm not confusing them, she said. I know I can't give you back the months. I know I can't undo what your daughter went through without you being there because you were at home trying to figure out employment insurance. I know the number I'm going to send you isn't compensation for that. She had thought about this for a long time and wanted to say it correctly. It's just the difference between what was right and what I did. That's all it is. He said nothing for a moment. Then, okay, she said. The hamster thing, he said, is still undecided. Tell her the hamster needs time to make its own decision. He laughed, the same short, tired, genuine sound she had heard in the diner 8 months ago. That will absolutely not work. It might buy you a week. Maybe a week, he agreed. She transferred the money 2 days later. She included a line in the e-transfer note that said simply, overdue. She did not know if that was enough of an explanation, but it was an accurate one, and accuracy was the thing she was trying to get back to. On the last Friday in June, she worked late and then walked to Commercial Drive, because the evening was warm, and Vancouver in early summer had a quality she had been too busy to notice for most of the past decade. The light lasting almost until 10, the streets full of people who had come outside just to be outside. The mountains still visible to the north, pale and unhurried above the roofline. She bought a coffee at a place she liked and sat at a table on the sidewalk and watched the street. Lorraine Voss did not have a corner office anymore. She did not have a car service or a corporate card or a photograph in an annual report. She had a desk in a one-room office in Mount Pleasant, a client list that fit on a single page, and a jade plant that was doing well in the light from the alley window. She had learned, over a long winter and a difficult spring, the difference between the kind of woman who signs a termination notice at 9 in the morning and moves on to the next thing, and the kind who is still thinking about it in the cereal aisle 14 months later. She was not certain she had fully become the second kind. But she was trying, and she had found, to her moderate surprise, that trying was something. The coffee was good. The light on the mountains went slowly pink and then faded. She stayed until the streetlights came on, then walked home.